This video is about using tags in the visual timeline. So tags are a way to categorize events. So it's one way that you can search for events. And you get to come up with the categories. You get to come up with the tags. So this is the tabular timeline in the upper right. This is the timeline almost everybody is using most of the time. But there's another timeline along the bottom that allows you to scroll through time. It's also a feature that's used fairly frequently. And then you'll notice as you scroll this timeline on the bottom and set the current year of the diagram, it shows on the right where along this tabular diagram you have currently set the diagram to be. So that's the basic use of the timeline. But the visual timeline has a button here on the right hand side that expands it into this visual timeline. And this view it's currently showing is pretty simple. It's not used very often, but you can hold down Option on Mac or Alt on Windows and use your mouse wheel or trackpad scrolling to zoom in and out. And then if you let go of that button, that keyboard button, you can scroll back and forth. But what's very interesting and less often used is that you can actually stack up multiple rows of the timeline according to tag. So if you want to categorize or group events into something that makes sense for you, you can do that and it'll show separate rows. So let's just show how to do that. First off, we've got to add some tags to these events. So let's say, for example, we've got this oldest daughter of this nuclear family, and we want to set everything before her birth. We want to mark everything before her birth with a tag. So I selected all of the events before her birth, which is right here, 1980. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to select all events before that birth and inspect them all at once. So any change that I make here in this property sheet is going to overwrite and set that change on every single event that I've picked in the timeline, including the tags. So I'm going to go to the lower right hand corner. So now I'm editing the tags for all these events. And I'm going to add a tag here called before first child. Hit enter. So now I've added a tag to the scene, actually, not just to those events, but I've added a tag to the master list of tags. But I want to check this box and add that tag to these events. So there's that. So now if I go and, for example, edit this event, inspect it, go to tags, it's unchecked because I only checked that tag for these events before the birth of the daughter. For example, if I go inspect first job, that happened before the birth of the daughter, and I go into the tags there for that event, I'm editing that event, then you'll see it's checked. So there's one list of tags for the whole scene, and it's just a convenience that you can add new ones while you're editing the tags. So now I've got a tag here in the search view, because remember, there's one list of tags. So this is the same list that's in the other place. But the checkbox does something different here. This checkbox will only show events in the timeline that have that tag. Okay, so it's unchecked, and I'm going to go to the timeline. So this is where we're starting here. And all the events are shown. Now if I go here and check this box in the search view here, then I'm searching by only the events that happened before the first child were born. So it updated this timeline on the bottom, and it also updated this list here. Now it's only showing the events prior to 1/1/1980, which is when this daughter was born. So I can still snap through the events like this. If I want to give a case presentation on a subset of the events of the entire timeline, I can just add a tag for those events, and then it lets me cycle through them like this. Well, all right, so let's clear that. So now they're all back in here. Let's set the date back to today. So let's say I want to add another tag for the nuclear family. Only of the events that pertain to the nuclear family. So here's a shortcut to only show those events here. Is you select all the people in the nuclear family, and then you do Command-Shift-T. That's Control-Shift-T, I believe, on Windows. I can't remember, but you can look in the manual. And that brings up the time, only the events for whoever you've selected. So if I go here and select this cousin, it'll update to add in the cousin once removed. There's 2 events for that person. If I unselect them, it's going to update to only show the events for the people that are selected. So that's just a really nifty shortcut. You can pick anybody you want. You can do this, and then Command-Shift-T, and it brings up the timeline for all of those people. All right, so what did I want to do? I wanted to do that for the nuclear family. And now I'm going to pick all these events because these are all the events that I've currently entered for that nuclear family. And I'm going to add a tag called nuclear family. So I've selected them. I'm going to click inspect. And then I'm going to go to tags. So now I'm editing all these events, right? And then I'm going to add another tag here to the master list, but it hasn't actually set that tag on these people yet, right? So I'm going to say nuclear family. And now I'm going to check this box to actually set that tag on these people, right? So now that I've added another tag to this master list, I'll also see it in the search bar. And I can go over here, and when I click this checkbox, it's going to reset this timeline and then the tabular timeline behind this page here to only show the events for the nuclear family. So in this case, it's just this event here and this event here. Watch, they'll show back up, right, when I toggle that on and off. So that's how you can say, all right, well, I just want to pay attention to all the events for this one unit or group, arbitrary group. So now let's do another one. Let's do, well, actually, no, before that. All right, so now that I've got 2 tags, now I can actually see how the visual timeline stacks them up. So if I click one tag here, it's going to create a new row and it's going to label it. So before first child, it'll line those events out here. And then I can do this, like I said before, I can do Option on Mac. I can hold down Option on Mac or Alt on Windows and then use the mouse wheel to scroll or to zoom in and out on a point. Like I can go right here to this event, hold down the button, and then zoom right into that event. And then if I let go of the button, I can click and drag to go back and forth, or I can use the wheel. So I'm going to zoom back out, hold down the button, use the wheel. So I've only got one tag checked. It's labeled here, and it's only showing the events that occurred before that first child that was born New Year's Day 1980. Now if I click nuclear family, it's going to add another row above here, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to show only the events that pertain to the nuclear family, and it's going to line them up on the timeline. So it did that, and it also kind of made the timeline jump, and that's because because the nuclear family events have another couple of events at the end that require spacing out the timeline more or zooming out a bit more to show them. But what it does is it keeps the 2 timelines in step. So you can see 2000 lines up, 2010 lines up, so every year lines up, and the reason for that is that you want to be able to compare 2 different dimensions on the timeline, I guess you could say. 2 different tags, 2 different ways that you want to put events together that are in meaningful groups or categories. And because there's overlap between these two tags, I mean, I have a lot of things in the nuclear family that happened before the first child, so you see a lot of duplication here. A lot of the events are the same, but some of them aren't. All right, so let's go back here to the timeline. I'm going to clear this all out, reset, click this reset button. You can also click the reset button here that resets the whole diagram, but this one, when it's shown, it just resets the search criteria. So now I've got everything shown, no tags are being filtered or anything like that. Now I want to add a tag for the nuclear, or for the extended family. So let's add a couple more events here that are just to make that group a little bit more interesting. So the maternal grandmother, let's say she was born, would be an interesting date. Let's say 30 years before 1950. So 1925. Okay, now we've got another date there, and then we've got, let's add a name here so this person is easily identifiable. Maternal, I don't know what you'd call that, grandfather, great grandfather. There we go. And let's add in another event or a birth for 30 years before that, 1/1/1895. All right, so now we've got a couple more events in there. Now I'm going to go over to the timeline, and they'll show up here, right? But then I also, so then here's right back to the shortcut. Sorry, this is the easiest way to do this. I'm just going to pick everybody that I'm calling the extended family. And, you know, I don't know what you call an extended family, but for the purposes of this example, I'm picking everything but the nuclear family. Because if I want to slice them and compare the timelines, compare what's going on with the extended family with what's going on in the nuclear family, I want to be able to do that. So now I've picked all these people, and I'm going to use my shortcut I said from the beginning of the video, Command-Shift-T, or I think it's Control-Shift-T on Windows. And now I'm seeing only what's in those people. But I haven't set a tag on these yet. This is just a shortcut to get an arbitrary grouping here. So now I want to set the tag on these. So I'm selecting them all. I'm going to inspect. I'm going to tags, because everything, just to review, everything in this right pane here now, it pertains to the selected events in the timeline. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add another tag, double click on it, type in extended family, and then I'm going to, then just as a review, that only adds it to the master list for the whole scene, because they'll show the same names here, but I haven't set it on those events yet. So those events don't have this tag yet. Now I'm clicking it, and now they do have it. So that's just an important distinction that catches a lot of people up. Right, well now I've got 3 tags. So I'm going to click here to clear out my selection. And now I have all of these. I've got the raw event list here, is what I'm showing. But what I can do is pull up this visual timeline again, click the search button to bring back the search box, and then I can pick extended family, and it's just going to show those events that I have for the extended family. It's that one first cousin once removed here. I've got one event for them when they graduated high school. I've got conflict between them and someone else. And then I also have those births that I just added to make things, those 2 births that I added to make things a little simpler. So now if I add them all in, I'm going to get 3 rows, 1 for each tag. Now, depending on how you choose your tags and what you choose to add into them, this can be a very interesting way of comparing different, I guess, functional units or something like that in time. That's the first idea for it, anyway. But you can do whatever you want. I did a comparison of my brother and my father once, where I just wanted to compare our launch phases. So that was a little bit of a different example. It was just kind of an experiment. What I did was I I set tags on all of the events for each of us that occurred between the ages of 18 and 21, because I think by 21 we were kind of set on our life course, and there was and we wavered a bit before that, in between 18 and 21. So I was like, okay, I'm going to pick that section. I added one tag per person, and then I went and clicked this Sullivanian time checkbox here that does something very different. And it'll look kind of strange in this example. It's not a very good example for it. But what it does is it takes the beginning and end of those timelines and lines them up as a time difference, a time delta from the first event in that tag. So here, the nuclear family, or rather in the extended family, these events occurred in the 19th century. And all these other events occurred in the 20th century, but it's just lining up that first event and then getting the time scale exactly the same so that the time delta from the beginning is the same. There isn't a specific way that you can use this, and there shouldn't be. This is just, this is a tool that you can slice these things in a different way, depending on some creative way that you may come up with to compare timelines that occur at different points in time. So back to the example here for these particular tags, you've got, let's go here where there's a little variance. So you've got in real time, that's actually by calendar year, you've got the birth of the first child that occurred here. Before the birth of the first child, sorry, you've got these three events that happen. But the first cousin once removed happened before the first child, but is not a nuclear family event. That person is not in the nuclear family. So this gives you a way to compare a little bit of, while that was happening, what was going on in a nuclear family? Well, not much. But then the second daughter, or the second child, was born, that is the first daughter. So you can see that person is there, and that's not included on the before the first child because that was the first child. So of course they're not in this timeline. So that's how that works. Tags have lots of different purposes. They're meant to be very powerful. A side effect of that is that there are so many different ways that you can use them that there isn't a straightforward one technique for how to use tags. You don't just use tags to track nuclear family events. You don't just use tags to track symptoms. You don't just use tags to track extended family events. I came up with these just for this example, but you may come up with completely different tags that are meaningful for your research question, or that are meaningful for the way that you assess a family system clinically or professionally. And just to recap, there's something, or not to recap, but just to close it up, there's something that catches a lot of people up, that when you start filtering by tags, things naturally start to disappear on the diagram and the timeline. So just to recap here, if I clear out the search criteria here, and now I'm showing everything, then if I go in and pick before first child, and I'm only showing a subset of the full list of events in this family, sometimes people will mistakenly think that those events have disappeared and that there's a bug in the app. But the key is to remember that you can always click this reset button that will reset the entire diagram and get you back to today's date, so that you're not back, in time where there's also things missing and you might think that data is gone or corrupted or something. It'll get you back to today's date, and it'll show all of the events because it'll clear out the search criteria here. So that's just your ejection seat. It's your default get back to square one button. And there's another reset button that only resets the search criteria. So if I click before first child, this reset button shows up right here, and if I click that, it'll clear it out. Same thing if I just set a couple of dates in here. If I add a bunch of things in here, now it's searching, and of course nothing matches that weird search criteria, so this is empty. So is the timeline. But if I click reset, it will reset just the timeline, as you can see on the bottom and in here, but it doesn't do anything with the zoom and all that kind of stuff, or the current date with the timeline. So I hope that helps. Tags are a very, very powerful analysis tool, but they're not straightforward because there isn't a technique recipe for how to do that, how to use them. You have to think through what your question is, either in an assessment or in research, to figure out how you want to organize your observations in the timeline, and then maybe even how you want to compare multiple dimensions or groups of your observations in your timeline in this stacked view. So I hope that helps, and good luck.